Hello and welcome once again to Last Warning Truth Ministries. Today it is an exciting day because we're going to be starting on part 1 of a 10-part series on the feasts of Yahuwah. You know, a lot of people do not know about the 7 feasts of the year. We understand that Yahuwah created everything in 6 literal days, but then he rested on the 7th-day Sabbath. And the same way that we are supposed to rest every 7 days, there is also 7 feasts that are supposed to be kept throughout the year. If any of you have watched my videos, you understand how important the number 7 is in Scripture. My brothers and sisters, if you have not subscribed to our YouTube page, here at Last Warning Truth Ministries, we ask that you please subscribe, hit like on this video if it's helped you in any way, and please share it with others. And please also leave a comment below or send us an email and let us know how we're doing. Either way, please support our ministry. Very well, so today's study on part 1 of the feast days is going to be based on the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verse 11, where it says, "Thou shalt therefore keep my commandments, and the statutes, and the judgments, which I command you this day to do them." So here Yahuwah is telling us that we must keep his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments. So as we go throughout this study, we're going to find out exactly what those things are. A lot of people think, oh, I just have to keep the commandments. Well, as we study that, we will find something interesting. Now, we know that Elohim does everything in multiples of 7. And it's very interesting that Yahuwah repeats this same phrase throughout the entire scripture 14 times, which is 7 and 7. That is also a very interesting fact. Everything done in multiples of 7, or a lot of things that have to deal with the kingdom, Yahuwah, his commandments, his law, everything, is really dealt with in multiples of 7, and that's why he created everything in 6 days. On the 7th day he rested, and he put the 7th-day Sabbath inside of the commandments themselves. So, like we said, this study is going to be based on those 14 verses, basically talking about the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments. Now, today's part 1 is going to be focused mainly, I would say, on those who understand the RUACH of prophecy, or who have read some of Ellen White's material in regards to the statutes and the judgments. However, this entire series is going to be very based on Scripture. The only reason why we want to address Ellen White and some of her writings is due to a lot of the SDA brethren that will more than likely watch our videos. But this entire series of the feast days is really targeted for anybody who wants to learn more in regards to the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments, and the feast days of Yahuwah from a scriptural standpoint. There are 3 primary schools of thought among those who are studying the Jewish economy and what it might mean to the remnant congregation of the 144,000 in the last days. All 3 schools quote the RUACH of prophecy to support their beliefs. Here are 3 primary and opposing schools of thought. First of all, those who believe that most of the Old Testament obligations were met at the cross or at the stake, except the 10 Commandments, will quote statements from the RUACH of prophecy like the one following in 5th volume of Scripture Commentary, page 1139, where she says, In this ordinance, talking about Yahuwah's supper, or Yahushua's supper, Yahushua discharged his disciples from the cares and burdens of the ancient Jewish obligations in rites and ceremonies. These no longer possessed any virtue, for type had met antitype in himself. He gave this simple ordinance that it might be a special season when he himself would always be present. So, my brothers and sisters, some people use verses like this or quotes like these to say that Yahushua discharged us. He liberated us from the cares and burdens of the ancient Jewish obligations and rites and ceremonies. But what a lot of people do not understand is that these rites and ceremonies that he took away from us or discharged us from having to do with had to deal with blood atonements and offerings, as we will see and we will prove later on from the book of Daniel. Now, the second opposing school of thought is those who believe that the times of Elohim's Kodesh days, or the feast days in the Old Testament, will be meaningful in the last day events, and they will use quotes like these referring to Passover first fruits and the Day of Atonements in the word types, because the word types represents the feast days. And they will quote quotes like these in Great Controversy, page 399 and 400, where she says, "In like manner, the types which relate to the second advent must be fulfilled at the time pointed out by the symbolic service." So here we see that these types, feast days, have a pointed out scheduling, right, for the last day events. So a lot of people say, oh yeah, those types or those feast days have something to do with a prophetic significance in the last days, but we are not supposed to keep them today. So they will use quotes like this. This is a second type of school of thought. Now, the third type of school of thought are those who are searching deeply into the subject of Yahuwah's Kodesh days, believing that very definite and important light is yet to be shed on this subject. And they will quote quotes like this, found, for example, in Yahushua's Object Lessons, page 133. She says, "The significance of the Jewish economy is not yet fully comprehended. Truth, vast and profound, are shadowed forth in its rites and symbols." So those who are truly searching deep would quote quotes like this. There are still truths that are vast and profound that we must still understand in the rites and symbols in the Jewish economy. Now, we will begin to explore exciting quotes and comments from Ellen White and the RUACH of Prophecy to see what significant gems we can discover regarding these truths. We might uncover explosive truths that are truly vast and profound. For many years, we have profited from observing statutes regarding tithing. If we understand what tithing really is, and it's not money, please watch my tithing video in my channel, in my YouTube page, for more reference on that. But we have profited from the true observance of the statutes of tithing and the elimination of unclean meats and the health reform movement. In the following paragraph, we have at least 3 more statutes to consider that we would like to look at. From First Review and Herald, page 164, written in May 6, 1875, we read the following. "The statutes concerning marriage, inheritance, and strict justice in dealing with one another were peculiar and contrary to the customs and the manners of other nations, and were designed of Elohim to keep his people separated from other nations. The necessity of this to preserve the people of Elohim from becoming like the nations who had not the love and the fear of Elohim in their hearts is the same in every corrupt age. When the transgression of Elohim's law prevails and idolatry exists to a fearful extent, now think if the ancient Israel needed such security, we need it more today, to keep us from being utterly confounded with the transgressors of the law of Elohim. So basically here, she is telling us that if the nation of Israel back then needed these statutes and judgments, basically, regarding marriage, inheritance, strict justice with dealing with one another, shouldn't we the more need it today in this corrupt age? Good question. Ellen White considered herself as one of the we in this passage who would benefit if the present congregation of today kept this Mosaic statutes. What is the security that we need according to this above statement we just read? The statutes of judgments and the statutes of Moses regarding marriage, inheritance, and strict justice in obedience and dealing with one another. These three items cover a lot of ground. Many, if not almost all, of Yahuwah's statutes deal in these three categories. From First Review and Herald, page 164, or first volume of the SDA Scripture Commentary, page 1104, we read the following. In consequence of continual transgression, the moral law was repeated in offered grandeur from Mount Sinai. Yahushua gave to Moses these religious precepts which were to govern the everyday life. These statutes were explicitly given to guard the Ten Commandments. They were not shadowy types to pass away with the death of Yahushua. They were to be binding upon man in every age, as long as time shall last. These commandments were enforced by the power of the moral law, and they clearly and definitely explain that law. Do you see how she basically brought it out to the light? That the statutes and judgments were given to guard the Ten Commandments. They were not shadowy types to pass away with the death of Yahushua. Something that guards the Ten Commandments and explains the Ten Commandments are not the Ten Commandments. These additional religious precepts given to Moses were given to guard the Ten Commandments. Notice some of the everyday statutes mentioned by Ellen White in Third Review and Herald, page 213. Number 1, thou shalt not oppress a hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of thy stranger that are in the land within thy gates. Number 2, at his day shalt thou give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon the money. 3, thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor. 4, the wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning. This is the principle. What right do I have to draw interest on the money that belongs to the poor or one of my fellow brethren? Notice what the Ruach of Prophecy says about these above 4 statutes that we just read. Yahushua HaMashiach gave these commands from the pillar of cloud, and Moses repeated them to the children of Israel and wrote them in a book, that they might not depart from righteousness. We are under the obligation to fulfill these specifications. What did she say? we are under the obligation to fulfill these specifications. For in doing so, we fulfill the specifications of the law of Elohim. And that comes from Third Review and Herald 231, written in December 18th, 1894. These then are some of the statutes that guard and help explain the law of Elohim. Notice that, unlike what I once believed, there are some statutes written in a book that are specifically important to those of us who do not want to depart from righteousness. We are to fulfill them, my brothers and sisters. From Signs of the Time, June 11th, 1896, we read the following quote. Ye shall not therefore oppress one another, but thou shalt fear thy Elohim. These words had been spoken by Yahushua when he was enshrouded in the pillar of the cloud. The same teacher that had spoken these words had spoken the Sermon on the Mount. It was Yahushua who had said, Ye shall do my statutes and keep my judgments. Yahushua had presented the same principles on the Mount of Beatitudes as he did in the Mount Sinai. My brothers and sisters, it was Yahushua himself who spoke to Moses and the children of Israel in that Mount Sinai. He was the one who said to keep his commandments, his statutes, and the judgments. The question is, do we want to follow Yahushua or do we want to follow modern day Christianity? Do we want to follow the modern traditions of the interpretations of Scripture? And we're going to be going through a lot of Scripture. We're going to be going through some of the Paul's writings. We're going to be going through New Testament, Old Testament. We're going to be going through all the Scripture. So please hang on tight as we study this amazing message on the feast days. Many of the statutes are given in Deuteronomy chapter 26 and their judgments in chapter 27 and 28. Notice what Mrs. White comments regarding these chapters. This is not the voice of man. It is the voice of Yahushua from the enfolding pillar of the cloud. Read carefully Deuteronomy chapter 26. 27 and 28. Notice she's saying to read Deuteronomy 26, 27, and 28. Why would we do that if the statutes and the judgments have been done away with? Think about that. She says, read Deuteronomy 26, 27, and 28, for here are stated plainly the Baruch of obedience. These directions, which Elohim gave to his people, express the principles of the law of the kingdom of Elohim. And they are made specific so that the minds of the people may not be left in ignorance and uncertainty. Now pay attention to this part of the quote. These scriptures present the never-ceasing obligation. The what? Let's repeat that again. These scriptures present the never-ceasing obligation of all whom Elohim has baruched with life and health and advantages in scriptural things. My brothers and sisters, these truths are never ceasing. And we're not talking about the Ten Commandments here. We're talking about the statutes and the judgments found in Deuteronomy 26, 27, and 28. If you're not familiar with them, please read them, because they're also a prophetic situation that will happen in the end times because of lawlessness, because of man's disobedience. Let's continue on with another quote here from fifth volume of the Testimonies, page 509. We're just pounding them out so we can see that these statutes and judgments were not just arbitrary things that the Jewish practiced and that we no longer have to practice today. No, they were supposed to be never ceasing. She says, I counsel you to humble your heart and to confess your wrongs. Consider the solemn charge that David gave to his son Solomon in his dying bed. He said to him before he died, I go the way of the earth. Be thou strong therefore, and show thyself a man, and keep the charge of Elohim, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, to keep his commandments, to keep his judgments, and to keep his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do, and wherever you turnest yourself. Take this charge to your own heart, Ellen White says. Let no one flatter you in wrongdoing. Does Ellen White really mean that we are to keep Elohim's statutes, commandments, judgments, and testimonies? Is disobedience to these things really wrongdoing? Should we actually take this charge to our own heart? And if so, why? Perhaps the next quote that I'm about to read that is aimed at the final generation will answer these very questions. From 1 Testimonies, page 333, we read these two quotes. Oh, that Elohim, who reads the hearts of everyone, will bring to light the hidden things of darkness, where they are often least suspected, that stumbling blocks which have hindered the progress of truth may be removed, and that Elohim will have a clean and Kodesh people to declare his statutes and his judgment. What? Yahuwah's going to have a clean and Kodesh people that will declare the statutes and the judgments, not just the commandments? Seriously? Interesting. She continues on. The captain of our salvation leads his people on a step-by-step journey, purifying and fitting them for translation. Translation to where? To heaven. And leaving at the rear, leaving those behind, those who are disposed to draw off from the body, who are not willing to be led. So those who are not willing to be led to follow Yahuwah's commandments, statutes, and judgments will be left behind, according to this quote. These quotations assure us that at least some of the Mosaic statutes written in the book of the law are still worthy of our consideration and obedience. Mrs. White, whom most of us believe had more devotional perception than most, wrote very plainly that these statutes are soon to be presented by a clean and Kodesh people fitted for translation. Surely the 144,000 are being implied here because they are the last day apostles. And it makes sense because if we go to the book of Revelation, chapter 14, verses 4 and 5, we read this about the 144,000. These are they which were not defiled with women, with false congregations. For they are virgins, not that they never had intercourse. It's talking about virgins doctrinally. These are they which follow the Lamb wheresoever he goes. These were redeemed among men, being the firstfruits unto Elohim and the Lamb. Verse 5, and in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of Elohim. So my brothers and sisters, if they are without fault, if they are virgins and they got pure doctrine, if there is no guile found in their mouth, that means that they are preaching the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments in its entirety. Not parts of it, not pick and choose what we like or what we don't like. We need to let go of man-made traditions and follow the Torah, follow the laws and the scripture of Elohim. Some people claim, and we will bring this to a close, some people claim, my brothers and sisters, that every time that the word statute is mentioned, it refers to the feasts of Leviticus, chapter 23. But this is not so. Everyone knows that there are many statutes besides the feast. We just went through some of them right now. There is a double truth here. Not all statutes are feast days, but all feast days are statutes. Did you catch that? I'm going to repeat that again. This is a double truth, what we're saying here. Not all statutes are feasts, but all feasts are statutes. I need you to keep that in mind as we progress and as we continue on in the study of this 10-part series on the feast days. Now, how can the 144,000 as a clean and Kodesh people present the statutes and the judgments if they don't even know what these are? Did you catch that? How can they even present it if they don't know what it is? And one more question that I'll leave with you to ponder. Which ordinances were then nailed to the cross or to the stake? Ellen White and Paul and Ellen White both say that some ordinances and laws no longer remain. But which one were they? And that's what we're going to be addressing in the statutes eliminated in the second part of this amazing, groundbreaking study regarding the feast days. My brothers and sisters, please pray. Ask Yahuwah to open your heart and your mind as we go through this 10-part series on the feast days. It very well might be one of the most important things that you can do for your devotional life as we end this world's history. My brothers and sisters, please hit like, subscribe, share this video, send it to others, leave us a message below, send us an email, support our ministry, tell us how we're doing. And thank you once again for watching Last Warning Truth Ministries. Shalom.